Shubha, for this wonderful MLF. Lovely to meet you all this morning. I came in from Bangalore yesterday. Band Takshana, Male Bantu. And Mr. Ganapati, star of Mysore, announced that KRS is at 100 feet. And I got into my drive and I spelt the Parijata and I was in Mysore. So to that city, let me welcome the gentleman who's arguably the most successful thriller writer today, Ashwin Sanghi. I'm going to let Ashwin really talk about himself because he's a man of many parts. The Bharat series, which is 7 books, I think, has sold over 1 million copies. And for someone who knows a bit of Indian publishing, let me say that's a monumental figure. So he sits on a very tall pedestal when it comes to Indian writing in English and the thriller genre specifically. And he's also a storyteller. He writes self-help books. He's contributed columns in the media. And he's also a speaker. So he's a man of many parts. And if you look at all the Bharat series, of which this is the latest, The Magicians of Mazda, you will see that it's a phenomenal landscape. Not just this book, but across the Bharat series. There's myth, murder, mystery, all put together in the magic word masala. In the best sense of the term, which is what all thriller writing should be. So I think, from the time he started as a businessman to the very successful avatar that he enjoys today as a thriller writer, I want to start by asking you, Ashwin, what's been the spark, the journey in your own words, and what makes Ashwin Sanghi Ashwin Sanghi?
Well, Aroon, you've created a bit of a problem for me because now you've really set the expectation bar exceptionally high. But yeah, I grew up in a Marwadi family and half Marwadi, half Banya, so deadly combination. Culturally, the only relevant, my father sent me to start working in our, what they call the gaddi, the business, at age 13 or 14. We had a Munimji who used to wear a kala topi, and he used to say that there are 65,000 words that you can possibly learn, and maybe 6.5 lakhs in the dictionary, but the only 2 relevant words in your life are debit and credit. So that is the cultural context. In parallel to that, however, Aroon, there was my maternal grandfather, actually my maternal granduncle. He was a tremendous influence in my life. He lived in Kanpur and he had a massive library. And he would lovingly select 1 book every week or 10 days and send it to me. And he not only required me to read it, but he then needed me to send him a letter, because without sending him the letter, the next book would not come. So it was the earliest form of really doing a book review. During his lifetime, he sent me a little over 300 books. So actually, that was the real education that I got. And of course, in parallel, I used to be going back to the place where I was expected to be, which was my father's office. And Munimji would always say that, look, don't waste your time with these books. Reading a balance sheet is more important than reading a book. If you must focus on something, then book reading is less important than bookkeeping. And I would go back to Nanaji when I went on visits. And I would say, this is what he says. And he used to always tell me that, look, you're born in a family which is always going to worship Lakshmi. That is the DNA. But remember one thing, that there is a very, very unique relationship between Lakshmi and Saraswati. That Lakshmi tends to want to be wherever Saraswati is. So if Saraswati is here, then Lakshmi wants to come here. And if Saraswati goes and leaves this room, then Lakshmi also is very curious. Oh, where is she gone? And he said, so even if your aim in life is to go after Lakshmi, Saraswati first, Lakshmi will follow. And he said, the only deity in our lineup who can sit between Lakshmi and Saraswati is Ganesh. So live your life like Ganesh, which Aroon probably explains why I look the way I do. But having said that, the trigger, I was doing all my usual stuff. South Bombay boy, Cathedral School, St. Xavier's College, BA in economics, masters from Yale University, got back to work. Next 15, 20 years, my life went just as expected. And then I landed up in Srinagar sometime around 2002, which must have been my 10th or 15th visit. And I had gone there to attend a family wedding. My father had said that someone needs to represent us, so you go. And it was peak militancy. My flight got cancelled on the return leg, so I had to wait another day. And I was feeling very, very cooped up in the hotel. I told the driver, I said, take me somewhere. It doesn't matter where you take me, just take me. He said, have you been to Hazrat Bal? I said, yes, I've been there. Shankaracharya, I've been there. Have you been to Rozabal? And I said, what is that? So we went into the heart of the old city. There's a tomb out there, which has stood there, something has stood there from 112 AD.
112 AD?
2000 odd years. And it's the burial spot of a Muslim Pir by the name of Nasiruddin, but that burial is of roughly around the 13th, 14th century. But under the burial of Nasiruddin, there is an earlier burial, which dates back to the origin of the tomb. And it is believed that someone called Yusuf came to Kashmir in order to preach love and peace and brotherhood. And outside the two burials, the Nasiruddin burial is in the axis of Mecca. But the earlier one, which is below that, is on the east-west axis, which is ancient Jewish custom, really, east-west. And outside that, there is a plaque which has a carving of a pair of human feet showing the cross marks where the nails for a crucifixion would have been hammered.
Amazing.
And, I always discuss with my author friends, my writer friends, that do we as writers go out looking for stories? And the truth is that actually stories come looking for us. This was a story that came looking for me. I was still in my businessman avatar, but I was fascinated by the story. So I spent the next 2 years trying to understand everything I could about that tomb and the lost years of Jesus Christ. And that's what eventually resulted in a body of research. I gave it to my wife to read. I said, tell me how this thesis sounds. The next morning, she said, congratulations. I said, wow, you liked it that much? She said, no, I'm congratulating you because you've discovered the cure for insomnia, Mr. Sanghi.
She slept right through it.
1 page and I was out for the count. So, who's going to read this? You need to tell a story. And that's when I started converting it into a book. And I was done writing it by around 2005. And then, of course, my life took on a different trajectory. So that was the trigger.
Well, I think when we were speaking yesterday with Ashwin, I think we are all aware that how difficult it is to actually succeed in Indian publishing. Lots and lots, hundreds, thousands of people want to write, want to get published, but the challenges are very, very difficult. In Ashwin's case, we were just talking yesterday, it was fascinating. he had no intent of writing a bestseller or anything like that. The Rozabal Line, which came out of that visit to the tomb, was sent, I think was rejected some 15, 20 times.
47.
47 times. I mean, that's a bit of a record, and then it gets accepted. And the first print, the publisher is not particularly excited, gives him 2,000 copies and says, give it a shot. And 2000 has then, comes back to Ashwin and says...
So, I finished writing this book in 2005. Rozabal Line was finished in 2005. I couldn't find a publisher till 2007. In fact, even in 2007, I gave up because, the reality was that in front of my desk, there was a signboard I had which had the numbers 12, 18, 30, 33, and 38. So 12 was the number of times that J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter got rejected, the first one. And 18 was the number of times that Jonathan Livingston Seagull got rejected. And 30 was the number of times that Carrie, Stephen King's first novel, was rejected. 33 was the number of times that Chicken Soup for the Soul was rejected. And 38 was the number of times that Gone with the Wind was rejected. So I had those numbers, and then eventually, of course, as it turned out, I added one more number, which was 47. So I said, I've beat the pants off J.K. Rowling. So I tried my best to keep myself motivated.
Of course.
And then eventually in 2007, I said, listen, I'm tired of waiting. So self-publishing had just taken off in the US. And so I decided to self-publish the novel. I didn't know what the reception would be for someone called Ashwin Sanghi writing a thriller about the life of Jesus Christ in India post-crucifixion. They would think that I was smoking something very potent. So I figured that, okay, I used to be a Scrabble player. I still love playing Scrabble. And so I took all the letters of my name, Ashwin Sanghi, and I just jumbled them around. And I came up with Sean Hagen's, a perfect anagram. And so I self-published the book under an American-sounding name. And then, of course, in 2008, I wanted to see the book on the shelves in India. But at that time, my book was only available in the US on Amazon. And it had barely sold a few hundred copies. So then I tried to find a distributor. And so I sent out copies to distributors. And most of them said no again. So that was the second set of rejections. One distributor wrote back to me. And that turned out to be actually senior Mr. Padmanabhan, who had created East West books at that, he was very, very reputed in the South. His son, Gautam, had just started up an imprint called Westland. And they had a retail arm called Landmark, which was doing book retailing. So the founder of Landmark, Hemu, said that, why haven't you published? And I felt like pulling out my hair. I was so angry. I said, do you realize the number of rejections I've gone through? And she said, no, I think we can make this work, but we need to republish this and we need to edit it again. And that's when, in 2008, the book was finally published in India. The Rozabal Line never went on to become some instant success. We published 2,000 copies. Luckily, the publisher came back a month later and said, we've sold those. So we are now printing another 5,000. So they printed 5,000, and then it just went on printing. I mean, I think today the Rozabal Line would have sold probably at least a couple of lakhs by now. But I think what changed for me was really the second novel, Chanakya's Chant, which from the very first week was a bestseller. And the rest, as they say,
is history. That's fantastic. I think it's, and I think it's relevant for all of us here to ask. Of course, your persistence, I think for many years, was a very important thing that kept you going. But for a writer like you, and for others out there who want to write, who want to get published, what, in your opinion, is the secret sauce? What works and what doesn't work?
I would say too many people think about writing, but they don't write. I think that's the first part of it. The obstacle that people need to overcome is the idea of writing every day. It doesn't need to be lots. It could be 100 words, it could be a paragraph, it could be a Facebook post. But getting into that discipline of writing something every day is a wonderful sort of precursor. That is one. I think second, too many people worry about what people will say. That how will my writing sound? And that's again a real problem, because in the world of creativity, there is always going to be a critic. I mean, for every writer, there will be at least 10 more critics. And as they say, the relationship between the writer and the critic is the relationship between the lamppost and the dog. I mean, that's the reality. So how can you take that as the benchmark? How can you, for every person who throws you a rock, there's someone else who's throwing you a bouquet. So I think that's very important, that not worrying about what people are going to be thinking about, because it's a creative space. So everyone is entitled to their opinion. That is the second. I would say the third part of it, is that too many people think that, I've done the job of writing, it's got published also, now my job is over. No. I think it was Ernest Hemingway, I think, who said that, writing, write when drunk and edit when you are sober. And I added a couple of lines to that. Write when drunk, edit when sober, start marketing next morning, that's your hangover. Because you realize that just because you've written a great book, it's not going to be read.
Right.
So you have to go through the process of taking ownership to sell the book. That's number 3. I would say number 4 probably is that don't quit the day job. It's very difficult to write when you're hungry.
You need to make a living.
And it's going to be a while before those royalty checks will kick in. So you need to keep the income coming in so that you can do what you love to do. Right. At the point when you feel that, yes, now this can be my end all, then that's fine. And finally, number 5, in the event that you do attain success, then just remember that every word that came on the page was a blessing from Ma Saraswati. It wasn't yours. So I think keep your feet on the ground and just be eternally grateful and humble that those words came on the page.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think just to build on the thread of what Ashwin is saying, I think I'm sure many of you have read at least one of his books. But I think if you read the whole series, you'll find that he mastered a certain way of approaching the thriller. It's got elements of myth, as I said, mystery, magic, and masala. Now, if you take his latest book, and I want to refer to it at this time of our session, The Magicians of Mazda, it reverberated a lot with me because my wife is Parsi. Rayan here, and you've got a good bunch of old Babas and Babis in Mysore with historical connections. So it is phenomenally researched. I learnt a lot about the Zoroastrian influx into India in the 8th century and lots of the underlying Dan Brownish secret talismans, secret formulae. You also have fantastic connections with modern spies and intelligence, Mossad, the Iranian IRGC, the Quds force. So it's all intermingles in a very Dan Brown kind of way, if I can use that analogy. And even the rise of Bombay and the rise of Parsis along with the rise of Bombay, it's been superbly chronicled. It's an example of your writing style that involves a lot of research. So I want to ask you this as far as writing is concerned. Shubha will remember we did an online with Jeffrey Archer 2 years ago, and I asked Jeffrey, how do you write? And he says, well, I don't know what's going to happen 2 pages down. My pen's on paper and I'm starting. I roughly know what I'm going to write for 2 pages. And after that, I really don't know.
Wow.
So I want to ask you, Ashwin, when you get started on, let's say, The Magicians of Mazda, complex plot, large number of characters, multiple threads everywhere, is it the same style? You start and the pen leads you on? What happens?
No, first of all, I'm a bit of a tech geek, so I need my Apple MacBook and I need my iPad and I need my iPhone, and I keep on making notes even while I'm in the car. So all of that is connected to the cloud. So it's certainly not as romantic as Mr. Archer. That's one. The second is that for me, any book in the Bharat series, Aroon, is typically a 2-year endeavor. 2-year endeavor. Typically, I will have one of the important things which I want to point out to the wannabe writers or storytellers here is ideas. Because ideas hit all of us, but none of us capture them. And unfortunately, then the idea disappears and then you've forgotten about it. So what I do at least is that even in my normal life, whenever an idea strikes me, I email myself. So during the last 15 odd years, I have emailed myself more than 10 or 11,000 times. It could be something that I heard. It could be a web link I came across. It could be a page of a book that I'll take a picture and I'll email it to myself, a PDF, a YouTube video, whatever. That's number one. So by the time I'm actually working on a book, I'll go back to my idea bank and see which is that one idea.
And the idea comes from anywhere.
Anywhere.
Could be
it could be our conversation today.
Our conversation, yeah.
So that is what I then take up. Typically, I will work for at least about 2 months to 3 months on figuring out what research do I need to do. So for example, if it was, let's say, the Krishna key, then I knew that I wanted to go to Mathura, and I wanted to go to Dwarka, and Bet Dwarka, and I wanted to go to Vrindavan. So I knew what my travel itinerary was going to be. When I wrote The Vault of Vishnu, I ended up going at least twice to China in order to figure out, particularly on the martial arts circuit. Similarly, for example, Chanakya's chant, I knew that I had to cover reading of the Arthashastra as well as the Mudra Rakshas, without which I couldn't have developed the ancient story. So it could be reading, it could be traveling, it could be interviewing. The Sialkot saga is 70 years set post 1947. So I wanted to talk to people who had lived through those decades. Once I know what I need to research, then I'll get into the next phase, which is research, which will typically last me about 9 months.
Just
so
research.
where I'll just be putting together all the material. And it all goes into a database so that even in case some material I don't use, but I need it for a future book, it's there. Then I will go into the next stage, which is plotting. Typically, I will write my plots on Excel sheets because the format is great. It's a tabular form. So you have one row denoting a chapter. So if you take, let's say, a book like the Sialkot Saga, there are probably around 150 chapters. What is the age of the main protagonist, the antagonist? What would they have been doing in their lives? Would they have been in school? Would they have been in college? Would they have been setting up a business or experiencing their first kiss? What was happening in their lives? What was the social, economic, political backdrop in India at that time? And where do I end this chapter so that I hook you for the next chapter? So all of that then gets plotted out. Typically, it could be anywhere around 10 to 20,000 words. And then I get into the next stage, which is writing. My writing hours are 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning. So most people have a 9 to 5 job. I have a 5 to 9 job. Like for example, I'm here right now, but my writing for the day is done in the morning. And typically, that is the easiest part of my process because I am like a child with a coloring book. The outlines are drawn, and I know which chapter I'm working on today, and I only need to figure out, will I use a red crayon or a blue crayon or a green? That's it. So it's not sexy. It's not romantic. There's nothing. It's a very structured process. So it's 180 degrees to Archer. And finally, once I'm done with that, then I will go into the stage of rewrites. Typically, there will be at least 2 or 3 rewrites before it eventually goes to my editor, who besides having a wonderful vocabulary from the English dictionary, also has a wonderful vocabulary of invectives and cuss words. And so I will receive a stream of cuss words that, this is crap. And we go through that process for a few months. And that's how the two years gets completed.
Fantastic. Well, I can say that your use of the Excel spreadsheet shows that your bookkeeping training has not been completely lost, but that's a wonderful description. But if you people read The Magicians, there are also some very chilling descriptions. For example, Jim Dastur, who is the main protagonist in the book, is kidnapped by the Iranian secret police, so to speak, and he is kept in a torture chamber, which are small coffin-like cells. So you can't stand. So he's stuck in that and left for days on end. So, and you have rows and rows, and they're all described in a very eerie and in a very chilling way. So it sort of evokes the feeling that it's almost sort of as if you visited the Iranian prison system. And what about that kind of description?
So I think that part of it actually came to me from the James Patterson venture, where we did 2 crime thrillers together. And
by the way, Patterson is probably one of the world's great or most popular thriller writers. I think
he's the #1 thriller writer in the world, actually.
The world.
I think with probably, he's a little bit like a factory because he comes out with 8 or 9 books every year. And it is a very, very large business empire, because I think last year the royalty count for the Patterson set of books was about $90 million US. So that's 1 year. Now, when Patterson said, I want to set 2 thrillers in India, so I was happy to go along with that. And I said, wonderful, this is like a master class in writing thrillers. And when we started working on it, the few things that I picked up from him was, one, he said, amplify. He said, if you've got a villain, I want him to be much more villainous. If you've got a struggle, then I want it to be much more of a struggle. I want you to paint your hero into a corner where you also are now figuring out, how the hell do I get him out of that? And keep your chapters very short, typically less than 800 words. Make sure that every chapter ends on a hook. You need to get the guy to... You have to, I think this was mentioned earlier during the morning discussion, that how do you get people to turn the page? I like to think of writing as almost a process where you're sitting in a circle, 10 friends are there, and you're telling a story. And I think it was Alfred Hitchcock who said that the length of a movie is related to the endurance of the human bladder. So, you're only going to be able to sit till such time as your bladder holds out. But that's not the case with books. But I'm thinking to myself that there are these people sitting around in a circle, hearing my story. 3 people out of the 10 need to get up and take a bathroom break, but they don't, because the story is too interesting. They don't want to get up. So if you can start visualizing the chapter, almost like that, where you say, I don't want you to get up right now. I think that is very important. So when we were writing the private series, I realized that, people are used to the CSIs of the world and American crime dramas and all of that, but that is not the flavor that we want in an Indian crime thriller. Because investigation, forensics, detective theory, all of that works very differently. So, for example, for the first time in my life, I went to Cooper Hospital in order to study the morgue. How does the morgue operation work?
And how the dead bodies are stored.
And how there are trolleys in the passages, because they've run out of refrigeration. So they've just kept it in the passage. The stench, how do you describe the stench? I remember when I went in for the first time, the medical examiner held out a big steel dabba, opened it, gave it to me. I was wondering what the hell is in it. He said, "Naak ke niche laga lo." So what is it? Vicks Vapor Rub. Because you want to mask the stench. So those sort of things you only end up picking up by actually going out there. And I think that is what then brings the flavor into this sort of writing.
Correct. But even when before the idea of the magicians came, I think you said you met a Parsi gentleman and then that sparked the whole thing. Was that?
The Magicians of Mazda actually came from Dan Brown.
Dan Brown.
Because what happened was Dan Brown was in Bombay in 2014. And Aroon, I was doing the job that you are doing today, in the sense that we were at NCPA and I had to interview him in front of an audience. And after that was over, he said, "Ashwin, what are you doing for dinner?" I said, "Not much. Let's go to the Oberoi next door." So we went there and we sat down and we were there till about 2 in the morning.
Can I open it to the audience after that?
We were there till about 2 in the morning. And I thought genuinely that this was sort of now, the end. We said goodbye. The next day, he called me up at about 11 and he said, "Ashwin, my flight is in the evening. And I have about 3 hours in the afternoon. I've really not seen Bombay. I don't want to do any touristy stuff. Take me to 2 or 3 places that you think I will find fascinating." Now, that puts you in a very, very awkward position. Because now you have to get into his mind to figure out what will excite him. So one of the places, and in fact the very first place I took him to, was the Tower of Silence in Bombay. Wow. Because I found that so fascinating that, the whole concept of a dakma is something which is mind-blowing to all of us. So we went there. Of course, you can't go beyond a certain point, but we were able to do quite a bit of sort of scouting. And then, as it turns out, a couple of months later, I was on a flight with Baman Irani. And I said, I want to write a book on Parsis. So he said, "Have you read the Kissa-e Sanjan?" So I said, "What is that?" He said, "No, it's the first account of the Zoroastrians who arrived in 720 in Sanjan and were given refuge by a king called Jadi Rana. So you need to read that." So that's when I started going into it. And a couple of months later, I had already made up my mind that this is a next novel.
Fantastic. I think he launched it. Boman Irani came for the function and was saying, "How come I'm not getting the royalties for giving the ideas?"
Absolutely.
So that's wonderful. I think we are running a little behind time.
Sure.
So, but what I'll do is that we've had a very preliminary, unfortunately very short taste of Ashwin, his thinking, his works, his books, and so on. I also want to touch on one thing, but before I open it up to you, is that he's also a very successful writer of self-help series. So he's done 13 steps to bloody good health.
Which you may want to take with a big pinch of salt.
13 steps to bloody good wealth, which you may want to take with a much less pinch of salt. But he's written lots of these kinds of books too, where he wears a very different hat.
When I was getting rejected all over the world in my publishing endeavor, My father had a Punjabi friend, Aroon. He used to come on the weekends and they used to love pouring each other their Scotch whiskey. And they were very generous with one another. They would pour what are commonly known as Patiala pegs. For those who don't know what a Patiala peg is, it's basically 3 fingers of whiskey, but the fingers aren't held this way, but held this way. So they would pour themselves these whiskeys, and one day he asked me, he said, "Beta, you're looking very depressed." So I said, no one wants to publish me. So he said, "Remember one thing, son, in life, 99% is about good luck." So I said, "But then what about the balance 1%? That must be hard work, efficiency, talent, resources, networking. There are so many things." So he picked up his glass and chugged it down so quickly. It went down really smooth. And he said, 99% is good luck, 1% is bloody good luck. So I decided that I would write a book on luck, and I called it 13 Steps to Bloody Good Luck. And that resulted in a series.
Cool. So that's where you have Ashwin. We'll take 2 minutes. I just want to get the audience to interact. Another 5 minutes, please, if that's okay. So, yes, the gentleman at the back, we have time for a couple of questions. Please keep it brief. Thank you. Yes, sir. Can someone give the gentleman a mic, please, so that he is audible?
Sure. I've always said that there are 3 E's that I work towards, and they are in a proportion of 70-20-10. 70% I must entertain, because otherwise you'll not turn the page. 20% that hopefully you will come across material which you may not have come across earlier, which is the educate. And 10% by the time you reach the end of the book, you'll start having an aha moment where you wonder, why did I not think of it this way? And that's that moment of enlightenment. So educate, entertain, educate, enlighten, pretty much in that order. But frankly, I must tell you, sir, what I try and do, it started with a small visit to Kolkata where I had a little extra time and I was taken to a temple. When I went into that temple, I realized that it had a small green-colored throne, very simple whitewashed walls, and there was a portrait of Amitabh Bachchan on it. And I realized that I had gone into the very first Amitabh temple in Kolkata. And in front of that was a pair of shoes which had, which he had used for the shooting of Coolie. I came out of the temple and I was waiting for my car and driver to come. And a little boy came to me and he had a basket which had agarbattis and flowers and little bit of prasad that one could take inside the temple. I didn't buy any of that. I bought one small little item from him. It was a little booklet called the Amitabh Chalisa, and which I still have. And that was the day I realized, I said, supposing at this moment, Ashwin, you die and you take rebirth 1,000 years later and someone asks you, could Amitabh Bachchan have been a real man? But that's the question we are asking about so many things, whether it's Ram, whether it's Krishna, and so many other great figures from the things that we called mythology, which is actually our itihas in some ways. And so the thought I had in my mind was that there is always going to be an overlap between what we popularly call myth and what we call history. And people tend to think that myth is fiction and history is fact. But I want to remind everyone that George Santayana said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there. So in that sense, it is always a narrator's bias. So all that I try and do is I take these 2 words, myth and history, and I try and combine them into another word called mystery. That's what I try and do.
Thank you. I think we are sort of done, but Ashwin's there, I think, for a bit. Please interact with him. Otherwise, I'll get physically thrown off the stage with Ashwin behind me. So thank you.